Welcome to this short video on stress and anxiety. What we're talking about in this video is the sort of anxiety or stress where a person is responding in a way that seems out of proportion or inappropriate to what's in front of them. And the person knows this and will often feel like they're fighting themselves when they try and change that situation. That is to say, try not to feel anxious or try not to feel so stressed or try and cope with what's going on. It's almost like they're fighting themselves. And to some extent, that is what's happening. In order to explain this, I really need to talk about a little bit about how the mind works. The mind is a pattern matching machine. If we find ourselves in a situation that's potentially stressful, the mind will go on a search in our past for something to help us deal with it. Now, memory is context and state related, state being the feelings that we're feeling at the time. So when a person finds himself in a situation that's potentially stressful or potentially anxious, their mind will go on a search in their past for information to help them deal with it. Now, this is a very simple mechanism of mind. It's one that's very natural, very normal, and we use it hundreds of thousands of times a day. If we come to a door, for instance, the nanosecond before we put our hand out, turn the handle, walk through the door, our mind goes on a search in our past for something to help us deal with it. And we flash on a template for what a door does, what a handle does, and we use that information to navigate that door. In a situation where someone experiences anxiety or stress, however mildly, the mind does the same thing. However, if a person has a situation in their past that's highly charged emotionally, the moment their mind references that experience, if it hasn't been dealt with, hasn't been processed, the person is suddenly feeling like they did back there then in that experience. Now, in the case of where these events occurred at a point in their life where they were much younger, that is to say perhaps as a child, because there is an element of what's known as regression in this, a person suddenly feels like they're maybe a little boy or a little girl again, disempowered, helpless, because a child is helpless, doesn't have much power in its world. And the person is then filtering their current experience through that lens of disempowerment, helplessness, and anxiety, and viewing it as if it's a threat to their existence. Now, when something is viewed as a threat to our life and our existence, we activate what's known as a fight-flight response. The fight-flight response is a part or a process of the old reptilian brain. So don't think mammalian brain, think dinosaurs, because that's how far back our evolutionist goes. So when a person is in that frame of mind, the frontal cortex drains of blood. That's the neo-brain, if you like, the last part of the brain that has evolved. So our thinking brain goes offline. And our reptilian brain comes to the fore, and we are ready to attack or run away from whatever's in front of us. So you can start to see if we've actually plugged into a point in our past where we've been helpless, overwhelmed, the reptilian brain's been turned on, we're thinking and feeling like a little child again, and everything's black and white, all or nothing. That's not a very good place to be in order to process what might be a somewhat insignificant event or situation. And this is why when people have this type of experience going on, it does feel like there's a part of them that's overwhelming them, that they're fighting themselves to try and shut it down, close it down. Because whilst there's one part of their mind saying this is a very hugely dangerous situation, because it's plugged into that past experience, there's another part of them that's saying, whoa, this isn't very serious. Why am I feeling like this? Why am I feeling overwhelmed? And unfortunately, the emotional part of their brain overwhelms the thinking part of their brain. So the approach that hypnosis takes is that this old programming, or this old conditioning, if you like, this trauma conditioning, is out of date. It's inappropriate, obviously, for what's going on in the present situation when it's referenced. So the hypnosis, my approach in hypnosis is to basically update that programming. Allow a person to process that past at the unconscious level, so the unconscious mind understands that event is in their past. It's not who they are now. The emotions in that situation are no longer relevant to who and where they are now. Once the unconscious mind understands that, when a person finds himself in a situation that's potentially stressful, the mind goes on a search for information, but all it finds is logical, rational information, because those events from the past are no longer emotionally loaded. So the person's free to make up their own mind about what's in front of them, to process it in a way that's logical and rational and appropriate to the level of stress that's involved, or not, as the case may be. So that's how I approach things, and it's very efficient. Usually only requires one session to do, and afterwards the old emotions no longer run. Now, that might sound almost too good. The reason why that might sound almost too good is because a person may say, well, I've got all these situations in my life. I've got loads and loads of situations where I've been stressed, been anxious, overwhelmed, worried. Okay, here's the thing. If you think about it, what happens is the mind references the past to guide it how to deal with the present. Each one of those situations where a person may have felt anxious, may have felt stressed, has been informed by that early experience. So once the early experience is updated, so all the others. They're no longer relevant in the way they were before, because they're not obscured by that process. So it's a lot more straightforward than people necessarily would realise to start with. Sometimes a person will maybe have had a recent event or situation where they've been overwhelmed, and they say, that's when it started. I've been feeling this problem, I had this emotional issue since that occurred. It could be death of a loved one, it could be the breakup of a relationship, it could be a situation where someone's been abandoned, it could be a situation where there's been a breaking of trust, it could be any one of a number of situations that are very emotionally charged. And the person says that's where it started, and before that they were fine. The second type of situation, and I go on to mention this because it's relevant to the first. The second type of situation is, as we discussed before, is where a person has had a traumatic event or experience in their childhood, and they've experienced they've experienced stress and anxiety all their life. They've always been like that. That's who they are. They almost identify with that sense of anxiety, that sense of worry, because they don't remember a time when they haven't had that feeling. Now, strangely enough, the two situations are very similar, because more often than not, when I find a situation where someone says, yeah, I had this event, this major event in my adult life where I've been feeling really bad ever since then, overwhelmed, usually what's happened is that major trauma in their adult life has found a match. It's been so significant, it's found a match of another overwhelming situation in that person's childhood. That childhood event has been woken up now, and they're now referencing that past event, that past experience, in the present. So as they try and deal with that more recent event, they're not just dealing with that, they're dealing with almost a double whammy. They're dealing with the earlier event too, which is outside their conscious awareness. So how can the conscious mind process that? They think they're just dealing with that event that's happened recently, but in actual fact the mind is bringing forward that previous event, referencing it as fast as thought. And that's why a person quite often has difficulty in processing an event. So they both have their roots quite often. Both types of situations have their roots in the childhood situation. So it's important that that's updated so that the person can then have an appropriate response, appropriate feeling response, appropriate logical, rational response to more recent events. I hope you found this interesting. If you want more information, please feel free to call me. If you have particular issues that this resonates for, or maybe you feel your situation is somewhat different, then obviously do feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to talk to you and discuss how I would approach your particular issue. Thank you for listening. I hope this has been helpful for you.